New data released today shows China's retail sales growth falling to its lowest point since 2022, indicating that the country's economic slowdown further deepened. Joining us to discuss is Daniel Lacalle, chief economist at Tresses Hedge Fund, international financial analyst, and the author of the book Freedom or Equality. Daniel, very good to see you. Good afternoon. Can you just start off to talk to us about how significant is this sharp slowdown in retail sales last month? Is it an indicator of weakening consumer confidence?
Thank you very much, Don. It absolutely is. And it's very, very important because you may remember that the Chinese government centered all its economic growth plan and its strategy to improve its position relative to the export market on strengthening the consumer segment. A lot of the messages coming from the administration, from the government in China, were highlighting that if the Chinese citizens started to consume as they expected, then they would not have to rely on exports as much, and that would certainly strengthen the industrial and productive sector and bring back also the real estate sector. So what I find very important is that the slowdown, which now is being sort of diminished or at least talked like not important by the Chinese government, is actually very relevant because it is highlighting that the precise policy of the Chinese government, which was to strengthen and increase domestic consumption, is not working at all. And it's logical because the slowdown in economic growth is leading also to a slowdown in salaries. The weakness in employment is showing that youth employment has risen way too fast. And all those elements are making it impossible for domestic consumption to rise as much as the government wanted in order to offset the weakness of exports to the United States.
So, Daniel, what would you say is the original sin, if you will? What has started this effect of weak consumer confidence? Because it doesn't just happen overnight.
Exactly. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of incorrect policies that have been added one on top of the other. Number one, creating an entire economic system based on very, very low wages and a system in which the economy and the social fabric of the economy depends on each individual. Therefore, low wages and a very small level of social protection fabric create an environment in which citizens simply cannot increase consumption. Furthermore, those that had been able to save in the past years saved mostly in debt or paper coming from the real estate and construction companies. And those have been falling like a domino, and you have seen all the bankruptcies that have been published in the last months. All these elements go and add together in an explosive combination. Low wages, very, very weak social protection fabric, and at the same time, the demolishing of savings of a lot of private citizens that virtually saw their entire life savings disappear with the bankruptcies of the commercial paper of real estate companies. All those things have been very, very negative for the Chinese consumer.
Okay, speaking of real estate, maybe you can give us your comments on the property sector. Because if we're looking at the data here, China's property investment through November fell nearly 16%. So how are you feeling about the property sector right now?
Well, the problem of the property sector in China is that the government was too obsessed about the idea of controlling the bursting of the real estate bubble. The government doesn't deny that there was a real estate bubble and doesn't deny that there's an enormity of houses that are completely abandoned and the fact that there are ghost cities all over China. Nobody denies that. However, instead of making the system clean it up quickly, a lot of things were implemented that made it impossible to be at least eliminated rapidly. Number one is that the government did not even allow citizens to go out and sell their properties in order to control the slowdown in prices, which led to a persistent reduction in prices over and over for years. And all of that has created a problem because, on the one hand, you have real estate companies that are not being able to uh, to repay their debt, and at the same time you have a system in which some things simply don't add up. No? On the one hand, you have unaffordable housing in the cities where there is demand for property, and on the other hand, you have an absolute excess of capacity elsewhere. So, in real estate, what we are seeing is that the implosion of the real estate bubble is taking way longer than it should have if they had implemented free market decisions like getting everything out in 1 year, like we saw, for example, in the United States or Spain or Sweden.
So as you mentioned earlier, authorities have tried stimulating the economy, the property sector, consumption, and you said it didn't work. Why hasn't that worked?
Because you cannot have a low wage, low productivity economy based on making a lot of things very, very quickly and exporting them in order to keep everybody employed, and at the same time get people to consume the way that US people or US citizens or European citizens do. You need high wages. You need social protection fabric. You need a financial system that has freedom of capital and that doesn't have capital controls. Therefore, Chinese citizens, on the one hand, cannot spend and try to save as much as they can. And on the other hand, when they are trying to spend the way that they want to, they have capital controls. The problem of the Chinese economy is that you cannot have bake the cake and eat it. You cannot, on the one hand, say that you are going to have a completely controlled economic system in which you are keeping very low wages and you are making the economy competitive by maintaining a low cost economy, and at the same time thinking that those citizens are going to be able to consume the way that US citizens do. Those things don't go together. You need a big middle class. You need a big fabric of protection that allows citizens to have credit cards, that allows citizens to use their funds the way that they want to. With sometimes they can make a mistake, sometimes they don't. But you cannot impose capital controls and at the same time expect citizens to spend more. That is why when you travel around China, you see all these gigantic shopping malls that are completely empty. Is that citizens simply cannot go out and purchase. It's virtually impossible to get the credit card and the payment system that the West has if you don't have a rising wage and high productivity economy. The Chinese economy is a high productivity one in technology, but in most parts of the economy is a very, very low wage, low cost competitiveness type of economy.
Okay, Daniel, just one final question. Given what you said, and given that the Chinese economy, the status quo of it, maintains, right? Nothing changes. What do you say about the trajectory of where the world's second largest economy is headed?
Oh, the economy is going to publish 5% per annum GDP growth. Don't doubt it. It's very simple. It's very easy to put a 5% print on the GDP growth of China when the economy is so controlled from the government perspective in terms of aggregate figures. But we're going to continue to see a weakening of the consumer and a weakening of the industrial sector that is not technology driven, because the Achilles heel of the Chinese economy is working capital and the requirement of exporting as much as they can, because they cannot even reduce their working capital requirements with domestic consumption. So it's very, very challenging because I don't think that you're going to see high wage growth and big employment gains when you have such a high level of youth unemployment that the government itself recognizes. So you need to let Chinese citizens move to other nations freely. You need to make Chinese citizens have the full availability and freedom of capital that we have in the West. You need to open the economy, and it's impossible for the Chinese economy to strengthen the way that it can, because it's such an incredible country that has all the potential, but it cannot grow the way that it can and should with the increasing level of government intervention. What made China grow when the economy was opening was precisely that, was allowing private markets, private property, ownership of capital, ownership of savings and payments. And unfortunately, in the past 10 years, the government has gradually been implementing more and more control measures. And all of those have eroded the consumption, saving, and investment fabric of the Chinese economy, unfortunately.
Well, Daniel, you made such a great point about how even if the consumer continues to weaken, the government can just, print a 5% GDP number on paper regardless. Well, it's been really
Yeah.
good to speak with you this week. Thank you so much.
Have a great day. Thank you
You
very
as
much,
well.
Don.